Hello, friends. OverPower friends. Welcome back to the OverPower Mountain podcast. That's right, you're 10,000 feet in the air. The air's a little bit hard to breathe up here, but you get words of wisdom from me, the OverPower GOAT, the greatest OverPower player of all time. Today's podcast is the third of the big ones. The OverPower Basics. We talk about special cards. Special cards from the beginning to the end of OverPower have been, in my reason, the most fun reason to play OverPower. Sometimes they really hit the mark in terms of having the ability the character can do in the comic books is portrayed through the card through some fashion. On a few marks they really hit that. But in most cases they really kind of just flowed with gameplay mechanics they were attempting to do throughout the game and sort of put them with characters they thought at least somewhat appeased that ability. So to start with special cards, most characters got a basic set of 5 specials, I believe, and then got accoutrements or additions through later sets or through promotions or different avenues that different specials came out for different characters. Special cards break down into 2 basic categories. There are basic specials, which are essentially all specials except for the other category, which is 1 per deck specials. 1 per deck specials are special cards that you may only have 1 copy of them in your deck, period. Other specials you may have as many copies as you want, but of course you fall under the duplicate and discard rule. Duplicate, of course, being if 2 are in your hand or 1 placed and 1 in your hand, and discard, of course, being, once your character is KO'd, you have to discard all of those special cards that are specific for that character, unless, of course, you have some other means that those special cards are still live. So special cards, they visually are really cool looking to me because each individual one is another representation of the character other than their character card. Of course, as I aforementioned, a lot of the times the special represents some sort of special ability, and it's another cool visual way of seeing your favorite character in a different pose or animation. So they're all done with a border. This was to represent special cards in general in OverPower. Now, from the first set to the last set, they were all done with borders. Now, currently, as new cards are being released, they are still visually done with borders. However, where the special card text is now visually on the bottom in the newer OverPower cards, whereas in original OverPower or any sets all the way up to Image, the border and all the text is at the top of the cards. We'll get into that in a later set. This is just basics, OverPower basics for special cards. So the borders start off visually, I believe, in a nice yellow tone in the original set to this really cool sort of. I'm trying to mentally, visually remember them. I remember when Power Surge came out, it was visually this really cool sort of orangey border and just had this sort of mysterious look to it. And of course, in my mind, Power Surge being the most visually stunning art that was ever produced in OverPower, period. I just loved that whole range and, I guess, tone of OverPower at that particular time. So And then on, obviously at the height of my particular game in the old days of Overpower was Monumental, which was this beautiful brick border as well. Um, I would actually say IQ being visually probably the least memorable border, but obviously one of the most memorable sets. DC sort of being a vague sort of variant of this whitish sort of border as well. Of course, most people remembering DC border best through Fortress of Solitude, a promotional card that saw a lot of tournament play. So borders kind of have always been just a visual representation of what set they've come out in, which is kind of a cool way to visually mark a card as opposed to sort of putting a set number or set marker at the bottom of the card and then having every card look the same throughout your set from day one to the end. So I actually really like the border idea. There's a lot of information you get on the border as well that is nicely sort of demographed out. Visually on top of the border, you get what the special card does. So whether it's an attack, a utility card, or a defensive style card, it will tell you right on the top of the card what it actually does. Now, of course, in Overpower, sometimes there's a lot of convoluted moments where sometimes what the card says isn't exactly what it does, but there's ways to figure that out, and all that information actually is on the card, at least to the best of your ability. Some things get deeper down the rabbit hole in terms of rulings and so on later in erratas, but most of the time what the card does is right there on text at the top of the card. So it'll say acts as a level 11 any power attack, and then to the left of that would be any power 11 icon as well to act as a visual representation of the level 11 any power attack. So, or it would say defend a character one attack from level 1 to 9. Something along those lines. Or a big one per deck would be again, the level 11 any power attack would probably be a 1 per deck. As well as, like one of those fun ones we'll talk about later that got errata ended up being something like a draw 3 cards, discard duplicates. Originally, when this card came out, they thought it was, I guess, not powerful enough to draw 3 cards, and you could have a ton of them in your deck and just redraw into them. I guess just nobody tried the card out. So, that was one of those funny cards that later on, even though it never said 1 per deck on the original ones that came out, in later sets when they reprinted the card, they put 1 per deck on it, and of course, said all the ones that don't have it now. Which is something that you will deal with in Overpower quite a little bit, but once you get through the basics of most things, you will sort of see that not too many hidden little rules will affect most of your games. So to finish off with the border, we're going to say at the top again, you're getting all of the information what the card does, to the basic, textual wise explanation of what the card does. On the side, of course, as you're moving to the left of the card, think of the card almost as like from the top right of the card all the way across to the top left and all the way down to the bottom left. So it's like the full top of the card and the full left side of the card is the border of the card, showing you that it's a special card. And of course, again, each set had their own special border. And then in the actual space where the border wasn't was, again, that visual representation of your favorite character doing some sort of fun action that, semi-matched the card. As you went to the left of the text at the top, of course, you'd see any sort of icon representation if it was an attack, or, in the later sets, there were some icon representations that were just defenses as well. And then as you go down the down the border to the left of the card, you would actually see the name of the character. So, of course, if it was Nightcrawler, you would just see Nightcrawler's name right there up the whole left side of the card. And then as you moved all the way down further to the bottom of the left of the card, you would actually see the name of the card. So each individual card, so like Nightcrawler would have a card named Bamf, and the top of the card would say Nightcrawler or teammate may avoid one attack of 6 or less. Great card, actually, when it came out. I remember Nightcrawler being one of my particular favorite characters growing up. I remember how fun it was just to have, in the good old days, you'd just be bamfing attacks left, right, and center, and it would just be probably one of my more fun memories, playing in the back rooms of the comic book store growing up. So, I think special cards give people a very, very memorable, I think a lot of people have great OverPower memories, especially based off, a big special card that they got to play on somebody, or drawing a big special when they needed it most. And, these have iconic, memorable things that connect to us really, really tightly, I have to say. So specials, I think, other than character cards, I think visually can evoke some emotion in some of us OverPower players. I know one of my particular favorites is the Kingpin Draw 3, Business Savvy. I recently was very, very fortunate through a unique way to get the original art for the card as well. So, I've played this card a few times in tournament play. It's brought me a lot of success. All bless the Kingpin. So, these things really, I remember a play where I needed to win the game, and I played the Kingpin Draw 3, and I just drew the perfect 3 cards and won the game in a tournament. It's on camera. It was really just a fun moment in life, and just to get to relive it every once in a while, watching it on camera too, is quite a unique experience. I hope you all get to do that one day in tournament play. So specials, again, can really just connect to you in a different sort of way. We all play our favorite characters, but different specials that they have can really, if you play an 11 to kill a character, and it wins you a tournament, it just there's a feeling to it. You connect to it. So the borders really kind of just sort of show the different sets and have different unique thoughts. The X-Men border was really unique as well, as it had little X's, like the X-Men X's throughout it. Of course, the Monumental being the bricks, really kind of probably one of the more standoutish borders to me, in respect to most of them kind of just being sort of plain Jane, sort of orange, yellow, whitish style variants. So the border was unique, and then as you finalized on the border down at the bottom after the card name was something that was unique to OverPower, kind of. Not a lot of, at least I can't think of any other TCGs or CCGs, depending how you look at OverPower, had this idea of card codes. So what I mean by this is each special had a particular code at the bottom, and it was a double letter code system. So you can range, obviously, in your mind, everything from AB to YZ or ZZ or whatever double code you can think of with 2 letters probably existed. And in a unique sort of note, a lot of the cards later on, just as reference, when character or when people speak to each other and speak of overpower, I guess you could say, in overpower lingo, a lot of the cards are just known by their card codes, like EE being a very famous code from Sentinel's Master Mold, or X-Man Street Profit, is now known as an EE. Another famous, of course, the JW from Heroes for Hire, or White Queen, being the 3 that cannot be blocked by a special and can have an additional power card that also can't be blocked by a special. Very devastating in the game of Overpower. So these card codes, they do a lot of things. They obviously differentiate, each card, what they can, in terms of code-wise. But they also let you reference in terms of rule-wise. If there's a specific ruling to a card, you actually could look up that specific card and see the ruling for it, as well as meta ruling, which is, something we'll get into in a later podcast. That's a very deep topic that, has very different steps to it and how it got to it. But ultimately, you can look up the meta ruling and the ruling on a special card based off its card code. So, AA being acts as a level 4, blank attack, fighting attack, may make 1 additional attack. So cards like this, will have its own unique ruling system that you can look up. So you'll look up AA, and under its sort of special rulings, it will tell you everything that it was sort of ruled on and based upon that knowledge. Now, this is sort of harder to look up. There is a central system right now online that you can look up to find these card rulings, as well as meta rulings to them as well. Now, these are official rulings. These aren't like, homemade rulings that people have adopted to it. These are, straight from the original source up until, Image set, at least. Or X-Men, I think, came out after Image. So, yeah, X-Men set. I think it was Image Classic X-Men. So after the X-Men set. There was rulings all the way up until those cards, including meta rulings. So those all come from the card codes, and this is all, again, on the border. So it kind of explains everything in reference to that as well. Now, one of the special things in the card codes, in the rulings as well as the meta rulings, is whether or not a special can act as a defensive action or an offensive action. Now, this is very special and important because, you want to know whether or not, if you're being attacked by your opponent, whether or not this special can act to defend it, or whether or not you have to play it on your turn or your offensive action. So that's a unique thing that you're going to have to look up as well. Again, most of that information is online for you to peruse. Most scenarios, though, you can determine that just from the text of the card, although there are some sort of convoluted situations where there are 1 per decks, for instance, that say avoid 1 attack, may not be attacked for a remainder of battle. And then there's other 1 per decks that just say may not be attacked for remainder of battle. Now, the avoid 1 attack, may not be attacked for remainder of battle can be used in a defensive mannerism, like you attack my character, I can use that special to avoid 1 attack, and for the remainder of the battle, that character cannot be attacked. Very simple, very understanding of the rulings. Well, when you go over to the other one that I just explained, target character may not be attacked for remainder of battle. And that's also a 1 per deck. And in the rulings, it was ruled that that's a defensive card. So again, you attack me, and I can use that and say, I'm using it to avoid the attack that you're throwing at me right now, as well as my character may not be attacked for the remainder of battle. However, that card, because it doesn't actually have the initial line of avoid 1 attack, avoid 1 attack, it actually can be used in an offensive mannerism as well, or an, an, an offensive action from your turn. So what I'm saying is that one target character may not be attacked for remainder of battle. If it's my turn, I can say I'm using that offensively, and my character may not be attacked for the remainder of the battle. However, the other one per deck, avoid one attack, may not be attacked for remainder of battle, has avoid one attack on it. So it has to be used in a defensive mannerism. So sometimes there is a lightly confusing scenario that you do have to look up card codes, whether or not cards are defensive or offensive in that mannerism. Sometimes when they say they're offensive, again, they're referencing that they just have to be played on your action turn during a battle. So that sort of shows you the different uh, levels and reasons you need to sort of understand card codes, whether something's offensive, defensive, or both. Again, there's many more convoluted layers to that, which we'll get to further down the line. Probably not in this podcast, but in a more advanced specials podcast, we'll discuss probably individually a lot of the things you need to know to get to top level of overpower play. So that sort of shows the border, the codes, the reasoning behind it, the offensive, defensive, the meta rules. Those are all things that you sort of can get from the border of the card. You have to sort of think about usage now when it comes to how many you're going to put in your deck and the placing of the specials. Now, of course, you have to remember, as we always mention or I've mentioned in other podcasts, that placing, you do have a placing slot on each character. So this placing slot is beneficial for you to fill because, of course, card advantage is, as I always teach all my overpower friends out there, the key to winning overpower games. You're always trying to move cards forward or have advantage of cards through some sort of means. So of course, having the ability to place a special on a character, you should generally try to take advantage of placing that card. Now there's different reasons why you might not particularly want to. You want to have a special that acts as a surprise coming out of your hand. There's particular cases of that we'll discuss in a few minutes. So, obviously with usage, you have the scenario where you have a one per deck. So these cards, you can only have one in your whole deck anyways of that particular special. So these I do highly recommend in a lot of cases because they have generally very powerful effects. I do recommend to place these cards moving forward because, not only do they have powerful effects, but you generally will not duplicate them, obviously, because there's only one in your deck. Now, a lot of the cards, too, that you play in terms of specials, when it comes to team defense and things along those lines, is 1 to 9 style specials or 1 to 6 specials, or EE specials, as we aforementioned in the code section of this podcast. So master mold or defending power card style specials. EE, since we've referenced it several times, is avoid certain character or teammate may avoid one power card, to paraphrase it in a certain way, or remove a power card from current or permanent record. Like, how powerful of a card is that? Fantastic special out there. So with that being said, you look at the usage and the placing. Of course, placing is going to be its whole own podcast that we're going to discuss a lot of different, more advanced strategies of placing. But generally, you're looking to place and fill that special slot that each character has. When you're doing this, looking forward, you're trying to place specials that you obviously have less of in your deck or are truly pivotal, like negates and something, cards along that stature. I do remember there's a card, I believe it was the 97 Nationals, that just one special card took over the game. Um, to name this card, I shall say it was the ghost of Vertigo. Yes, that's right, Vertigo. Card by the Marauders, and to paraphrase it essentially said, any attack thrown upon my team, I defensively play this card, and I can shift it to any character I want for the remainder of battle. So any attack you threw, I could put anywhere I want and either defend it or take it. It became so powerful, especially when you teamed it up with characters that couldn't be killed by, power cards or other means. It was just became the most dominant card. And I can remember the Nationals that year. I believe if you weren't playing Vertigo, I mean, you weren't playing the game of Overpower at that particular time, because that's truly how powerful Vertigo was. So it was just a very unique time. Shout out to Duncan out there who, Team OP won the National that year with a Vertigo deck, Vertigo Heroes for Hire, I believe. So it was just it's very much shows you that special cards can take over the meta game of Overpower. Very famous specials that have taken over. Obviously, the meta of Overpower have been um, anything from the initial game of big attacks, nines and tens, and then later on they went with 11s. So these sort of big attacks were just huge abilities from characters to essentially create a two-card KO of your opponent's characters. Just really, really, really big cards to start the game. And then, of course, the very famous negates in the game. Negates mean that you play a special card, and no matter what it says, I play a card that says I negate the effect of everything that special card says. So even the most powerful cards in the game are literally stopped by this negate card. It's often why in tournament play, negate characters are almost an essential on a deck. But we'll get into that probably in a more advanced podcast when we get to deck building and references and ideas and the power behind the negate and the reasons why you sort of either always essentially need to have one or not. Another thing that was very famous was team defense. This sort of after, especially the IQ set came out, there was a lot of characters that had a 1 to 9 defense. That they could either use for themselves and the front line, or from reserve could use it to defend the front line. So 1 to 9 obviously being, a lot of even big attacks. They sort of bulked up on these and put 3 of these in their deck, and the team defense deck sort of became a big iconic thing at the time. So with big attacks, then there was negates, then there was team defense decks. Then when the team defense started piled up, and Overpower amusingly did this. It's like when a certain type of deck started to become the big meta, in their next set they would often put out cards that would like affect that current meta that they had. So, when big attacks were the big thing, they would give out all this team defense. And then when team defense became the big thing, well, then they gave out a card called JWs or JZs or cards similar to that ilk. And what those cards essentially did is they said, well, you can't block. They can't be blocked with a defensive special card. So, Overpower always was trying to like get ahead of itself and like create the next meta and create this sort of unique balance. And they really they did, right? Till one of the last, till the last sets. With just a few cards that obviously were like either super overpowered or underpowered along those lines. So the JW and the JZ era was really unique. Heroes for Hire even till this day, in the current Renaissance era of Overpower, is still the JW is still reigns supreme with Heroes for Hire. It's acts as a level 3 for Heroes for Hire. We'll specifically speak of the suit, but it acts as a level 3 special card, fighting attack. May not be blocked with a special card. May also play one additional power card, and that can also not be blocked by a special card. So you can imagine when you're just holding these activators in your hand, or defensive special cards, and all of a sudden one of your characters just opens up and they throw this from hand as a surprise. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, a reason why you might hold special cards in your hand that you just don't want to place, even though the placing slot is open. So there's moments like that where it's just like these cards are just game changing, because at the right moment the right special card can just be perfect. And how many times is it, if you've played enough games of Overpower, are they just like, well, you need 10 to win venture, or you need 10 to kill this character, and you just have that 10 in your hand and you just play it. Like, the odds are crazy, but it just truly happens. Or oh, you need a negate in your hand, or else this is going to like win the game, and then you just like your last card in your hand is a negate. It's just one of those things, as we talked about earlier, how special cards can truly connect to you in different ways that way. So, you know, Overpower just kept going with all these sort of different ideas and mechanics, and of course, there was always even the speed specials early on, which was as we mentioned in the card codes, the AA. So these cards allowed you to sort of play additional attacks, and some even said you can play 2 additional attacks, and of things of that ilk, even at plus and bonus natures. So they were almost like special card teamwork, sort of out of one character sort of thoughts. And then of course there was, which I still to this day think is probably the most powerful way you can sort of attack Overpower, especially if you're a new style of player. It's a very fun way to look at Overpower too, is the draw mechanic style of Overpower. Now, draw mechanic can happen in so many ways. Draw mechanic, I reference, can be draw or discard mechanic. So it can be cards that either gain you cards in your hand, or gain you cards through attacking, then drawing cards, or discarding. So you're discarding cards from your opponent in whatever degree, from their hand or from their placed cards. There's also fun ones where you can avoid cards and draw a card. So there's a lot of sort of really sort of unique draw mechanic cards. And as we always talk about Overpower, friends, what's the best way to win a game of Overpower is card advantage. So anytime you can gain card advantage through draw mechanic, or make your opponent lose cards, is always going to be very beneficial for you. So that's why I always say this is a fun way to sort of look at Overpower and sort of attack it through those types of characters that have those kind of mechanics, because generally they're really fun characters to play, and those are specials that I think you can sort of have a really fun and interesting dynamic way to look at it. So with that being said, you have to also understand the reserve character when it comes to specials. So the reserve character generally cannot play their special cards unless they have an inherent ability that says they can play their special cards, or an event that says that the reserve can play special cards, or the special card itself says on it may be played while character is in reserve. So there are several characters that do have this ability, either through inherent or through the ability of their special saying they can use it from reserve. A lot of these characters do see, high play when it comes to competitive Overpower out there. So there's a lot of advantageous reasons to have characters that can play specials from reserve, because obviously, you now gain access to that placing spot of the special on reserve, right? It gains you that advantage of cards moving forward from battle to battle. Now, there is also the other strategic idea of having a character that just maybe lines up better grid-wise and maybe backs up like your 8 stat or something along strategy-wise for your deck that way. And maybe, of course, you get the bonus that they have just a really great one per deck that they get to come up with, whether it be like a draw mechanic special like the draw 3 I mentioned, or a big attack like a 10 or 11 or something like that. So there's a lot of reasons that, a reserve could be of a different nature in terms of specials and the ability to use them. But then, of course, you always have to remember when you play a reserve character with specials, you have to remember two things. If you draw the card, like let's say for an example, we use the reserve character where they have a big special attack, a 10. You only get to use that card when one of your front line dies, and that character gets to move up and replace one of them, which is fine because, an overpowered characters die all the time. Maybe you have a strategy where you want your character to die. So it's, that's fine. It does happen quite frequently in the game of overpower. But you always have to remember one thing is you only get to keep that character special in the initial draw phase. So you have to hope to draw it in the 8 cards you get it, because at that point you get to place it on your reserve character and have it for, that when the time comes. Now, however, if you draw that in the middle of your hand, you actually have to discard it unless you have a way to play it through some other special card means or some other event or something that has given you the ability to play that special. But if you do draw it in the middle of a hand, or after, your opponent ventures hard at you and you draw that card, you have to remember you're going to have to discard it because you've passed the placing phase and you can no longer place it at that particular time. So be careful when it comes to specials and the reserve, as there's moments in Overpower where, one, even maybe 2 specials could be a scenario that you could think of in some strategies, but you always have to remember that after placing phase, those just become straight discards should you get forced to draw them or have a drawing mechanic upon which you do draw them. So generally having a character that can play reserve specials is probably advantageous for you in most competitive sort of scenarios. And with that being said, I think I've kind of given you the general perspective of what specials are. Now, again, specials are, I would say, probably, other than power cards, the second most card count in your deck. Now, of course, there's strategies where teamworks are, high card counts. But for most characters, I think to give people a basics, again, for specials, is you're generally in the 3 to 6 range for specials on frontline characters. And then you probably, again, depending on if your reserve character has access to reserve specials, at that point you're probably at like a 2 to 4 range, depending how aggressive or conservative you wish to be. Or if, of course, they have the big one per deck that you can just hold and place for that perspective as well. So at that case, you'd only be at the 1 or maybe 2. And depending if you have a home base where you could even place another second big one per deck. So with that being said, you kind of get the perspective that specials, as I famously said in my Power Card podcast, power cards being the blood of a deck, I would say that specials would be your skin, it would be the thing that's sort of holding everything together and sort of is the defense and offense, whether it be the thing that takes the cut or throws the punch. So specials really, you're looking when you're looking for characters and not only mashing their beautiful stats together, for some cohesion, you're also looking for specials that create cohesion together as well with characters. Um, Again, famously, the Vertigo playing with, Heroes for Hire so that it could slice through um, potential other Vertigos and defensive cards, and famous specials being Scarlet Witch, opponent discard, being different, of course, than target discard, because opponent discard, even though coded the same, um, targeting the opponent, uh, which must be negated, whereas target character must discard also can be avoided because you're targeting the character. So again, things that you would look up in the card code and you would actually see the differences listed there for you online. So specials being, I would say, the strategy behind even the earliest games of Overpower. Probably either, whether it was the big attacks through strength decks or like the locking down mechanisms of, target character may not attack specials through the energy decks. Of course, later on as the game progressed, as we mentioned, through JW's negates and then team defense, big attacks, speed specials, and draw mechanisms. So specials have always kind of changed the meta, as power cards and universe cards have always essentially been the same and been there since day one. Special cards, as new characters come out, have changed the mechanics of how Overpower have played. Now, some mechanics, like I said, have always just stuck and stayed true, as they truly are just staples of the game. But with that, the last thought of specials, and we will go on to this in the final of the Overpower basics, but is any hero specials. Now these specials came out right from the get-go, and they were specials that any hero or villain could use. Now, of course, regular specials, only that particular character can use them or place them along those lines. Whereas the any hero specials, when you had them in your deck, it doesn't matter which character you use them through because any of them could use it. So they were a mechanism that Overpower created to sort of add some spice and some unique, very powerful cards in the game. Again, we're going to get into those in a further thought. So as you create your specials in your deck, you're looking again at the amount that I mentioned before, but you're looking always for cohesion strategy. It's where that sort of spice of the game came in. Obviously, half of the fun being the mission and the venturing portion, which again we're going to get into very shortly in another Overpower basic. But specials really kind of created this strategic backbone of what your idea of what your team was trying to do together. So that's always, I think, where I would leave your brain on specials, is to realize that the specials in your deck are the strategy and the cohesion your deck is doing. Are you playing a team defensive style deck, or are you playing a big attack style deck? And or all there in between. Trust me, there are a lot of decks this day and age that are working. For a while there, the world of deck building kind of got stuck, but lately, with different home bases, new characters, especially with different specials that never saw the light of day, are now starting to see the light of day through unique deck building out there. So Friends specials are in a very special place. Funny enough to say. So take a little look and think through in terms of the cohesion of specials when you're building your decks. Again, for your frontline characters, you're again looking for that sort of like 3 to 6 range, unless there's much more reason for you to have more specials and that's total specials for characters, not individual amounts for specials for characters. I'm not saying 6 of each of their specials. I'm saying, 3 to 6 of their total specials. A lot of the people having like 2 good 1 per decks, and then 3 of their non-1 per decks being generally really good cards, or 4 of their non-1 per decks being generally good cards. Of course, you can get up to the 7, 8, 9 count, depending on the strategy of your deck. That's what I'm always saying is the fun part of Overpower when it comes to specials is there's never really any right or wrong answer. As I've said before, it's really the deck building creativity that Overpower revolves around. I generally would say, you always want to watch out when it comes to specials, as I've mentioned with the other basics of universe cards and power cards, is you're always thinking about the discard rule, or the duplication rule, where each special is a duplicate of itself. So, every level 5 attack that you have that's a special card for a particular character is a duplicate of itself. So you can't really run too many of those. You really would have to have a reason to run a lot of those particular specials. Or the negates. A lot of people generally run 3 negates, where sometimes there's a reason to run 4, sometimes there's a reason to run 2, sometimes there's a reason to run 6. But I would say even with the more uber powerful cards like Vertigo we mentioned earlier in this podcast, even at its heyday, you weren't looking at more than 4 or 5 of them. Again, always with a strategic reason behind it. As I mentioned earlier, there's a podcast out there there was a deck out there that had 20 something of one particular card. So there are reasons, and it's the fun part of Overpower, like I said, not only visually but strategically. So specials are the skin of Overpower, and it's holding it all together. And even through new specials that came out recently, they're even changing how, the any hero scene works and things along those lines. So thanks again for listening. Once again, from the Overpower Mountain podcast, this is Marcel, the OPGOAT, the greatest of all time, coming to you 10,000 feet above Overpower land. Until we meet next time, have a great day.